So we hear a lot about the big names in Congress, and these are the folks behind the scenes doing the work that we have to thank for the continuation of our democracy. And we're about to start the next panel. I am very, very excited to continue today's day of spiritual and intellectual nourishment by introducing another fabulous Trinity leader. Dr. Kimberly Monroe is an assistant professor of African American history and Africana studies at Trinity. She earned her PhD in African diaspora studies and women's studies from Howard University. HU, hello. Dr. Monroe was born and reared in working class South Louisiana. She's a scholar of African American studies and the global African diaspora. Her research interests include Africana women activism, Black internationalism, global Black power, Pan-Africanism, hip-hop, and African literature. She is currently developing her manuscript, The Black Underground, Assata Shakur and Global Freedom Struggles. So make sure to make a note to pick that up as soon as it arrives. Dr. Monroe is an organizer with Pan-African Community Action, a grassroots group of African and Black people organizing for community-based power. Her hobbies include photography, visiting bookstores, museums, traveling and learning throughout the Black world. My goodness, you have time for hobbies. So that's amazing. So I'm so pleased to invite Dr. Monroe to share with us, and with her fabulous panel of students who will be introduced by Dr. Monroe.
Thank you, Provost Ocampo. I'll invite the panelists to come up now. And as they get settled, I would just like to thank President McGuire, faculty, staff, alum for being here for what I think is a very unique opportunity for Trinity to have a panel of such from students from Georgetown, George Washington University, Howard University, and of course, Trinity Washington University. And we want to especially thank Karla Nunez, who has returned, our beloved daughter of Trinity Washington University, to give us, to lead this discussion. And so I'll be brief. If you want to read more about the panelists, you can just look into the program that was provided at the front. Karla Nunez Perez graduated from Trinity with a BS in public health. A lot of her work includes working in community for undocumented people, but also she was president of the Butterfly Network while here. We have Latrese Johnson. They are in their third year undergrad at Howard University, member of the Kwame Ture Society, a Black liberation study group grounded deeply in the Black radical tradition. We have Jovanna Walker, student at George Washington University, sociology and history major with a specialization in African American history, president of Black Defiance, a student organization dedicated to the political consciousness of Black students at GW. We have our very own Cinthya Calderon-Hernandez, political science and global affairs major here, also vice president of the Butterfly Network, which is a club dedicated to aid Trinity's undocumented community and provide guidance in academia and the professional world. And she also works with United We Dream. And lastly, we have Kessley Janvier from Georgetown University. She's a student organizer with Hoyas advocating for slavery accountability and former president of the Georgetown University NAACP. Please welcome our guest and welcome home our alum. So I'll leave Karla to the panel discussion, but I do want to start with just a general question. What was you all's inspiration and entry into student activism?
Okay, thank you for that question. I've been organizing since I was in high school. The issues that really were brought to my attention were the issues of police brutality. I'm from St. Paul, Minnesota, so I'm not sure if you all are aware of the civil unrest that happened during the summer of 2020, but that kind of sparked my involvement in student organizing. So I led walkouts at my school, as well as issues around sexual harassment.
I started doing activism in high school, and this was all based on personal experience. Being undocumented here in the United States came with a lot of struggles, and not only that, but also being queer when it was for going up to the streets and, you know, advocating for my sexuality, for myself. It was just all part of who I was.
I think for me, I started organizing in middle school. I remember taking a history class and learning about different wars that were going on around the world, and realizing that there were so many landmines that were undetonated across the world, but there were none in the U.S. And I feel like that was kind of my starting point, like, why does the U.S. have no landmines, but across the world they're scattered in places where people are living? And I think once I got to high school, I started organizing around climate justice, and then that transferred into thinking about environmental justice, so thinking about the world around us, which included police, thinking about food justice, thinking about public transportation. And yeah, since then I've been thinking about political education as a tool for uniting communities and pushing for liberation.
I think I started organizing in high school also. I led anti-racism efforts immediately after 2020, when there was actually space to have that conversation in my high school. I went to a predominantly white, upper middle class school in the UK, and if you know anything about the UK, it's that they like to think racism is a uniquely American problem. It's not. The UK actually wrote the book on racism, and I started organizing from there, and when I got to Georgetown, really just made a pivot into reparations work.
I just want to say thank you guys for being here and kind of sharing a little bit more about what got you into organizing. And I guess just to get started with a question, and anybody can go, it's from your perspective, how has democracy shifted within your lifetime? And how has this shift influenced the idea of democracy as a whole for you?
I think for me, as Professor Monroe was stating, I'm a history major, so I think about everything in a historical context. And I think when we're thinking about the evolution of the United States, democracy was a thing that only certain people were allowed. It was, you know, young white men who owned land, and there were a plethora of people with different identities that were denied the right to vote, denied the right to engage in a democracy. So I think within my lifetime, I'm conscious of that change. I'm conscious of the people that do not have the privilege to engage in a democracy, to engage in voting. So I think about race, I think about class, I think about gender. And I think in a post-Obama era where people thought that democracy was this inclusive thing where, you know, black people are suddenly free and, you know, we're on the same level as everybody else, I was still conscious of that class aspect. There are people in the South, working class people around the country that are denied the right to vote, denied the right to access to stand in line to cast their vote. So being conscious of that, I think there has been an evolution of democracy when thinking about race, but there is always that like class and gender aspect that needs to be investigated.
I think for me, when I was younger, democracy didn't seem like it was something that included me. Not only because of my legal status, but for my legal status. And I just got more like, I live here. I'm a human being. I think I deserve to also be a part of this. And it's funny because in Kuvili last year, there would be like posters on the elevator, and there was one that really stood out to me, and it was, if you don't have a seat at the table, bring your own. And and that's, I mean, I'm here, right? So that has been my thing, I think, ever since high school, ever since I decided I wanted to come to college. I think I had to stand up. Y'all don't want to hear me, y'all are gonna hear me. So yeah.
Yes. So for me, from a young age, I think democracy has been presented to us as, you know, a very fair and equitable system. There's checks and balances within the system. But for me, democracy started to be characterized, at least for me, as a system of contradiction. Once the 2016 election happened and Hillary Clinton won the popular vote, but for some reason Trump is in office. So how old was I? I think I was maybe about like 14, 15 at the time, and I was just, you know, kind of asking those questions like, why is this supposed to happen? I'm 20 years old now, and throughout my lifetime, I have seen democracy mostly influence other parts of the world. So I know for me, my childhood, my coming of age was really shaped by seeing what America has been doing in other countries. You know, this kind of like idea of protecting democracy, being just being very straightforward, you know, to justify heightened military action, especially like in the Middle East. So for me, democracy is really synonymous with the interest of the United States. And a lot of the times, like, that is in direct opposition with the well-being of people that do not live in the United States.
Thank you, and I think that's really important to consider in like this talk about democracy as a whole, not just here in the US, but how policies and everything that's going on here also affects other countries as well. So thank you. Moving on to another question. We know that voting is very important and encouraging people to vote is very important. I have talked to a lot of youth and especially people like that are advocates in the movement, and they're kind of finding it a little bit hard to kind of pick like what is the best candidate, what do I do, like, you know, kind of like not trying to contradict themselves and their values as well. So how do you navigate like choosing a presidential candidate to back up and support?
Okay, I guess I'll start. For me, it was quite simple because one candidate completely contradicts all of my values. So we kind of ruled out, like, if you want to play, I think I'm going to use like Goldilocks and the Bear as an example. So we had one bowl that was too hot, unseasoned, wants to take away all my rights, right? And then we have the other bowl that's like kind of how I like my porridge, but like wants to make sure that people in other countries have no porridge. So then it's like, well, now what do we do? And I think the thing that I had to wake up to was realizing that there was not going to be a bowl of porridge for me, because white supremacist heteropatriarchy in this country was never created for people like me to thrive, and was never created to represent my interests. So it becomes this like choosing the lesser of two evils, except at the end of the day, you always end up with an evil, right? And so I think for me, I cast my ballot. I turned in my first general election presidential ballot, was absentee a couple weeks ago, and I voted for Harris. And I voted for her because I had to pick the president I wanted to organize under. And at the end of the day, my ability to organize is based on the rights that I have in this country, and that's how I ended up making that choice. But I want to be very clear that I did not wake up in the morning thinking Harris is the morally superior person. We are not besties. We are not getting married. But at the end of the day, that's who I'd rather work under.
I think for me, as a student organizer that is like deeply entrenched in the like activism space at GW and in the DC area, I realized that like youth are understanding their red lines. You know, like genocide is a red line for them, abortion bans is a red line, mass deportations, book bans, things like that. And I think that shows that like people, youth, particularly myself, are realizing that like we have power and agency within this democratic system, if we want to call it a democracy. Like we have the power to contend with leaders in the electoral system. And I think when I'm thinking about like how I navigate politics, I refer back to W.E.B. Du Bois's "I Won't Vote" from 1956, which he wrote, which seemed like he wrote it yesterday. You know, like he's contending with this idea that like no matter who I vote for, the system is always going to stand, and knowing that the system itself doesn't, you know, support me or progress me in any type of way. And I think for myself in this election, I'm thinking really about like my interests, like what I actually care about. So I'm looking at the candidates' positions on the genocide in Palestine. I'm thinking about the situation of mass deportations of Haitians at the border, particularly also in Boston as a city with a very high Haitian population. Those are things that I deeply care about. So I think with that, I'm thinking, which candidate supports the things that I do, and if they don't, I make a decision based off of that. And also what Du Bois was talking about in that article is that, like, you know, there's so much power in the vote, and if we restrict it, if we choose to vote for somebody, that's one expression of power, but if we choose to restrict that, that's also an expression of power, saying that, like, it's not rooted in despair, it's rather dogged hope for a bunch of people to recognize that they have power and agency in their vote, and they need to utilize it to have candidates that express and support their policies, the things that people want. So, yeah.
Yeah, I'd like to echo what's been said already. It's hard to choose a candidate when your values don't really align, and for that reason I won't be voting in the general election. But I do really support voting at the local level, voting for people that will be on the school board, the mayor, things of that nature. But honestly, funding genocide is my red line. I won't be able to sleep at night knowing that my vote put somebody in office that has no plans to stop the bombing of schools, of hospitals, things of that nature. And I also understand that my freedom and my liberation, also my oppression, is linked to the Palestinian people. Who's to say that the police won't be using those same tactics on us? You know, Kessley, I feel like you had a really good point about like which candidate would be easier to organize under. I absolutely agree that Kamala Harris would be an easier president to organize under, but I do think that our rights are at stake either way, you know? So no matter what ends up happening, I will still be in my community organizing, putting boots to the ground, and actually, you know, assisting and helping folks that I live around.
Okay, thank you for that answer. And I think that kind of segues into this next question, which for people that are kind of in that limbo where like, well, I don't really align with these individuals, so like, you're not just gonna sit there and do nothing about it, you know? So here at Trinity, we have a large undocumented population and student body. So I think when these elections come, and then it's kind of, a lot of people feel a little bit like hopeless and they don't really have a lot to say, but they really do have a lot of power. So like during these times, during these elections, and people could not take part in the elections, what are some alternative ways to take action?
I think in that aspect, like, I have learned that even though I can't vote, I can help. And I've dedicated in canvassing, participating in text banks, educating my community. Even though they can't vote, they have to know what is going to be affecting them. Do they have friends that can vote? Talk to them. Do storytelling. Do what you're going through so that people can understand. I think in that, like, it has great power and it has great community building. You don't feel so alone. You don't feel so left out. So then that aspect, like, it has helped a lot. And it also gives back power to us in a way, too. It gives us a voice. And I think that that's one part of democracy, that even though it's not written on paper and we can't put in a vote, we're doing our part. And I think that that makes a great difference.
I would add quickly that I feel like every 4 years when the election comes around, like there's just like sense of urgency, like what do we do, like thinking about all these people that have been deprived of the right to vote and engage in a democracy. And I think it begs the question of thinking about like the times where the election is not there, you know, like the other 3+ years. And I think that shows that like we have to organize, we have to engage with our community, we have to understand what people need, understanding how undocumented individuals like are quite literally deprived of basic necessities, of basic human rights while living in the United States. So I think when speaking to like undocumented people, especially like my partner, her parents are undocumented from Haiti, and like understanding their concerns with the election, but also understanding like they have those concerns every other day. So like thinking about those not as just something that arises every 4 years, but something that we have to meet the challenge of every single day with our community.
Yes, to everything that's been said. I would like to add also that it's important for us to organize because we need to have structures in place for once, you know, the system is failing us. We're descending further and further into fascism. We need to have systems and structures in place so that we can survive after. You know, speaking to the after, I think, is really important. So I agree, like, organize, organize, organize. That is so important.
I thank you for that. I think community organizing is really important, and I feel like I've definitely found a lot of myself and who I am as a student advocate in that space, especially working with United We Dream. As being undocumented, it does sometimes feel like, well, my voice is not being heard. I'm not there casting a ballot, but I feel like you being there, educating the community and stuff is really important. So thank you for that. Now moving on in a question. We know that if Kamala Harris were to take office, she would make history as the first woman president of the United States, but she would also be the first woman of color with this title. What would it mean to you for her to be in power, and what do you think it would mean to those who identify as Black in this country?
Okay. My take on this is probably might be popular with the panel, but not with everyone else. But my attitude is that just because you are a member of a marginalized group does not give you some kind of moral superiority and does not make your policy good for that marginalized group. Ta-Nehisi Coates has actually just been talking about this in his book tour about his new book, The Message, where he's been talking about Israel. But one of the most important things that I think he says in the book is that, again, being a member of a marginalized group does not give you the right or give you the ability to not oppress somebody else in the future. So I tell you this to say that, yes, well, I would, you know, I love the idea of there being someone who's similar to me in office, but I think the things that I would relate to Kamala Harris on, how we do our hair, or the fact that, you know, she went to an HBCU and my brother is a bison. That's correct. My brother's a baby bison. He's a first year at Howard. Like, all well and great, but at the end of the day, it doesn't matter if the things that you're doing in office are actively harming members of our community. And I say this all the time, and my mom hates it, but it's like the first Black woman this, the first Black woman that. Do you want to be the first Black woman in hell? Because it's all well and good being the first. It's not productive if you're not doing anything to help our communities.
I think for me personally, again, like taking it from like a historical lens, like some people may see it as a symbol of progress. You know, like we've come from a system of chattel slavery to the first woman of color, specifically a Black woman, in office, in the highest office of the United States. But I think for me in particular, I view it as a distraction. Like there's so much conversation about like whether or not Harris is Black, which is just like, you know, completely unrelated to like the state of the United States right now. I think talking about like her race or her various identities is a distraction to like what's going on, as I was saying. And I think in some ways it's also a concession to the system to say that we're accepting representation, we're accepting a Black woman, a woman at that, being in the highest office in exchange for liberation. And I think as a student organizer, as somebody that is so deeply connected to communities that have been historically marginalized and oppressed in very violent ways, liberation is always the goal. So thinking about like, what does this mean for a woman to be in office, but the genocide of the Palestinians to still be occurring, you know, mass deportation still going on, abortion still being banned in southern and western states. So I think like identity is important, but how do we create, how do we utilize identity politics to understand like our position as like Black or marginalized working class people that are organizers in relation to somebody that is going to maintain the highest position in the country?
I do agree. I feel like identity, I will acknowledge that identity is important to a certain type of way, but like when you get to a level, I realized really early on that politics is really classist, and race, there's a certain part where like race doesn't matter, being a woman doesn't matter. If you're being influenced to do something against, like it doesn't matter if you identify as a woman or if you're Black or if you're Hispanic. I just want it to be consistent. Like I think that this is more of a like manifestation that I hope that the identity doesn't get lost, like, because I think it does. People forget. They start going about what will be what is it called? Like, what's the priority? What's the best for the state? And, you know, what's happening overseas? Like, but what does that impact me as a woman, as an immigrant? Like, how will that go to be? So, I don't know. That's my take on it.
Yeah, I don't really know where to begin because I'm a current student of Howard, and Kamala Harris is an alumni, and so people on my campus are very much ecstatic that she is she's running for presidential candidate. But I just want to echo the points that have been made before. Just because someone, you know, is Black does not mean that they have the interest of Black people in mind. When you look at her policies, they're very imperialist, they're very neo-colonial, they're very capitalist. And that's not going to free us at the end of the day. So if she wins, which I think she will, I think that I will have to work harder at highlighting the contradiction of a Black woman in office. I will have to, you know, work on disillusioning my fellow students from glorifying her just because she is a Black woman. I'll have to push them to engage critically with politics. I think we can also expect further repression in terms of those of us who do decide to speak out against these atrocities that are occurring. I think we can expect continued surveillance because there already is already, but I think we can expect even more of that, especially those of us that are inside of the imperial core. I think we can expect a continuation of the housing crisis, of the stress that's being put on the economy due to how COVID was mishandled. And if she's elected, I think that the work still needs to be done. The organizing work to get free still needs to get done. I expect that people's material conditions will get worse to the point where they will be radicalized and understand that they have to get up and do something.
Thank you for that. I think you guys brought out a very important point, which is that happens a lot in politics, I think, where it's like you have this individual and it's like, oh, they look like me. Well, it's like other individuals like, well, you should be happy, you know, they're there, you know. But at the same time, it's like, does that person have the same values I have? Do they align with my morals? Like, there's more to it than just, oh, well, they're a Latino or they're Black, they're gonna obviously represent me, you know? So I think that can open up a whole conversation. Okay, well, they're letting me know that I have to open questions to the floor now. So I wanna thank you guys for like sharing your input, and then I wanna open up the floor for any questions from the audience.
Testing.
How y'all doing?
I really enjoyed the panel. I'm glad that y'all were here to just kind of speak on the youth vote. I wanted to ask, how are y'all ensuring, or how are y'all helping youth radically dream, right? Because I think a lot of us are not seeing beyond wanting a black woman that will go bomb kids in Gaza, right? Or deport our brothers and sisters that are here, undocumented. So I was just wondering, like, how are you helping through your organizational efforts, folks to radically dream, and how do you make sure you are radically dreaming in a system that is trying to ensure that we don't see beyond what the reality is right now?
This is a really great question because I actually just came from a workshop called Justice Imagination Lab, where we were literally talking about this. But I come from reparations organizing, and reparations is, there's 3 reparations commissions, all at the local level in this country. We have not been able to get any reparations commission at the national level, so for all intents and purposes, reparations is a dream. Right? Reparations for African Americans. And the thing that keeps me going is thinking about how I am the descendant of enslaved Africans in Haiti. And I think that even 2 generations ago, my great-grandmother, who actually just passed, she was 105, could not have imagined that her daughter, her great-granddaughter, first of all, that she would have great-grandkids that she would know, right? But second of all, that her great-grandkids would be working on Capitol Hill and who would be organizing in their communities and frankly would have a level of freedom that she herself could not have dreamed of, let alone her mother, right? So for me, the thing that keeps me going is thinking that freedom from slavery was a dream at one point, and we have found a way to make that a reality. Well, not we, but our ancestors. And that's how I keep going, because there are too many people who could have succumbed to their circumstances and not had dreams and not had hope that would have never allowed me to be where I am.
I think I would say something along those similar lines, like relying on our ancestors, Black revolutionaries that came before us. You know, like I was referencing W.E.B. Du Bois, and he wrote that article in 1956, you know, and I hope that people, like, after this panel, like, you read that article because it is very illuminating of, like, present times and, like, understanding and having a humbling experience knowing that, like, people were contending with these things that the youth are struggling with today. They were struggling with this 50 years ago, 75 years ago. And I think they had that revolutionary optimism that students today are having, knowing that systems are falling. Slavery fell, you know, chattel slavery fell, and, like, things, systems, empires do not last forever. And I think, at least for youth, they saw what student activism looked like in the spring with the student encampments across the country, different forms of student protest on campuses, in the streets. I think that people have a renewed sense of what community looks like, what community building looks like, what knowledge production looks like, getting together with your fellow students or classmates, thinking about, like, having these hard conversations about democracy and, like, thinking about what our red lines are. I think encouraging that dialogue within youth, struggling to a place of unity, I think is super important to recognize that, like, we're all trying to understand what's best for the Black community, for the undocumented community, for the you know, marginalized community. So I think relying on community, but also paying respect to those who came before us that struggled with these same questions.
And just to add on to that, I feel like along with the dialogue, it's very important to also address the intersectionality of all the struggles by, you know, like my struggle is also part of the Black Lives Matter struggle, police brutality, the Palestinians, I'm going through that too. Like it's all connected in a way. And by knowing our stories, by listening to each other, we can empower ourselves in the same, knowing what has changed before. Change is possible, and it's possible now. So, like, I feel like it's very important to just listen to each other. What's your struggle? how can I connect to that? How do I empathize with that? And that's very powerful in community building too. Like, that's how you make change. So I think that even though it's sad to listen to all of that, it also gives us like an optimistic view. So.
Yeah, I think that my organization maintains revolutionary optimism because we read a lot. Being in conversation with ancestors is very important because they wanted something more, just like we do now. And I think of Assata Shakur, her saying that we have a duty to fight for our freedom, we have a duty to win. We must love and protect one another. We have nothing to lose but our chains. So that deeply resonates with me, and that keeps me doing this work, especially when I show up to KTS and I get to, hang out and just joke and laugh with them and know that, like, we truly want better.
If we could have a next question from the audience.
First, I belong to the Metropolitan Women's Democratic Club. I love your energy. I love that you all have a diversity of thought about this year's election. I just wanted to say, and I've been struggling, and there have been many people struggling with some of those same issues that you are struggling with. But I want you to remember at the end of the day that so many people died for our right to vote. Male and female, black and white, died for our right to vote, especially for black people right to vote here in the United States. And I know some people are on the fence because I've heard it over and over again from the millennials and the Gen Zers. But at the end of the day, you got to ask yourself, our democracy is on the line, and there are so many things that may be taken away from us. And when you decide whether or not you're going to vote, I heard the lesser of the two evils, and that's one I've used, and somebody had some remarks to say to me. But, if you have someone rich running the United States, what do you think they're going to do for you? What do you think that they're going to care about? They've already taken away. What was it? Roe versus Wade, which people fought. Black people fought for us to have that right, and that's been pulled back. And now at the universities, they're doing away with, what is it, affirmative action is being rolled back, which means a lot of us are not in these universities now. So I just want y'all to think about that when you want to make that decision whether or not you're going to vote, because I had the same conversation with my daughter, and I'm going to let you know, and I took this in college, Israel and Palestine had been fighting since I was a child. So if we decide based on that, this is even before the people that are in office now.
The mics are not working. Okay, it's working now. I want to be very clear that we're not disrespecting our right to vote. I was just in Georgia last weekend to break SB 202, which is Georgia's voter suppression law that prevents us from giving people water in line to vote, and that's a Republican-led, a Republican-passed law to inhibit us from voting, right? We respect the right to vote. I just want to be very clear that we need to be more considerate of the moral implications of our vote, not just for people abroad, but people here. And a Kamala Harris presidency, as much as I love the ads, I think they're great. I'm in comms, they're all fun and games, and I agree that there are rights that are going to be taken away. I agree with you that there are rights that are going to be taken away here if Trump were to win, but we cannot frame everything as let me choose my words very carefully. We cannot frame, I'm not going to let the person that I'm choosing to vote for, the person that I'm giving my consent to her governance, get away with genocide because people died for my right to vote. She is a public servant, and it deserves to feel my wrath. And if my wrath is at the ballot box, she's going to feel my wrath at the ballot box. And if that's my wrath is me picking up the phone and calling the White House, or me picking up the phone and calling my senator, ask Chuck Schumer's office. They hear from me at least twice a month.
Our time is up, but I do want to close really quickly with just a brief question for the panelists. What are you reading right now, and how, because I'm a professor, so that means something, you should be engaging in some type of literature, right, that's informing your politics, whether that be on a local level, global level. And so what are you reading, and maybe what advice for students who are interested in getting more active, like a book that you maybe, can recommend?
That's a good question. Right now, I'm reading How Europe Underdeveloped Africa by Walter Rodney. And for an introduction for students, actually, I would say read Asada's autobiography.
Right now, I'm reading The Descent Channel. It's about a diplomat going into South Sudan, Juba, and it's pretty cool. It's very insightful in how diplomacy works overseas. And a book I would recommend is A Thousand Splendid Suns. It's the same author as A Kite Runner, and I think it gives you a good insight into the Middle East. So, yeah.
Right now, I'm reading Black Disability Politics by Sami Schalk. It's about the intersection of blackness and disability, what disability is in the United States and abroad. For people that want to get more involved in organizing, I would echo what Latrese was saying about Assata Shakur's autobiography. I would also really recommend reading The Price of the Ticket by Frederick Harris, I think. It talks about the rise and decline of black politics and focusing on Obama and what price black people are willing to pay for representation in office.
Okay, I'm currently reading We Were 8 Years in Power by Ta-Nehisi Coates. And I would recommend, I've got a lot of books. I would recommend The Fire Next Time by James Baldwin.
I think this one works. I tend to read a lot of memoirs because I like to see people's perspectives from what they have experienced, and a lot has to do with immigration. But right now, actually, I just started reading the book that Dr. Monroe gifted me, Graduation. It's 100-Year War on Gaza, and it's kind of taking a Palestinian perspective onto what's going on in the genocide in Gaza. So I would definitely recommend that book as well.
I saw some other hands, and there were students that wanted to engage with them, maybe in the lobby, so that we can keep the program going. But thank you all so much. This was amazing.